in the book of Daniel. It is a little bit longer because chapters 11 and 12 kind of go together, so you can't really separate them very well. So it is a bit of a longer lesson, and it's a lot of information. Just to kind of preface this conversation, there's a lot of information that we're going to be giving out, and so much so that some people have tried to conclude that the content of chapter 11 is not actually being written as prophecy. They actually try and say that it is being written while it's actually happening because it's so precise. But what that should lead us to believe is that the precision of the prophecy is also going to give us confidence in the things that have not yet happened. And so that's part of it that we can bring that to a conclusion and find interest in. So I said it's a lot of information. We're going to go through a lot of things. I don't have questions at the end like I normally do because it is a lot. So if I'm going through this lesson and there's something that triggers a thought or there's a question you have, whatever it is, just raise your hand. We'll stop it there. We'll take the question or take the comment or whatever it be there, because there is a lot of things going on here. But before we get into it, let's go ahead and open up with prayer. Father God, we do thank you for this opportunity that we have to open your word together. We pray that your blessings will be upon us as we do, that we'd have clarity of understanding and a confidence in the things that you are bringing to pass. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So chapters 11 and 12 of Daniel are the conclusion of I shouldn't say conclusion. They're the second and third parts of the vision that started in Daniel chapter 10. So Daniel 10 through 12 is all like one event, even though we break it up into different things. Chapter 10 is, if you remember, I know it was a few weeks ago, but it was the circumstances surrounding the vision, how it came to Daniel, that he received this information. Chapters 11 and 12 are the content. This is the things that were part of the vision and the dialogue and things like that. And I'm going to say this probably several times during the lesson. This vision and prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 is vastly different from anything else that we find in the Old Testament. It is just of a different kind and quality that we have there. So Daniel chapter 11 and verse 2 and through 4. Talking about the kingdoms of Persia and Greece. And what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to read whole sections of it to kind of give you it as an overview. But then when we go back through the points, we'll read the individual passages so that hopefully you can connect that information with what's actually happening there. So chapter 11, verse 2. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a fourth shall be richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who will rule with great dominion, and do as he wills. As soon as he has arisen, the kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. So the statement that the angel starts off with, hey, this stuff is reliable, this stuff is true, so be aware of it. And this affirmation of truth is reminding us about the reliability of the prophecy that we're going to have. So 4 Persian kings will arise. That's what verse 2 and 3. We're going to have 4 more Persian kings that are going to come before they fall to the Greeks. If you remember from history, there's going to be a lot of history tonight, by the way. So if you remember from history, Xerxes the First, if you remember Queen Esther, right? Xerxes was a powerful Persian king. He did stir up things against the Greeks, and he invaded the Greek areas, and that actions would actually lead to what we know in history as the Greek and Persian War, which would end with, does anybody know? Famous Greek commander? That was Helen of Troy, but that would be before this. Anybody? Alexander the Great. So that's going to be the king that's going to. So if you look at verse 3, a mighty king shall arise who will rule with great dominion and do as he wills. That's speaking of Alexander the Great. The warrior king will rise and be quickly divided into 4 pieces. So if you know anything about Alexander the Great, he didn't last for very long. Matter of fact, I think if I remember from history, he was in his 30s when he died. He conquered the known world while he was still young, but when he died, his descendants were all murdered, and the kingdom was divided up into four parts, into four generals. Now, there's two of the generals we don't really care much about because they don't really have much pertaining to this region of the world, so that's why we're not going to talk about them. But the other two are very important, and some of you are going to know these names. Again, if you study history, you're going to know them. The Ptolemies and the Seleucids are the two for historical. The northern kingdom was known as the Seleucid dynasty. The northern kingdom would be modern-day Syria. It would have included modern-day Israel and that region up there. The south, which would have been mainly Egypt and the southern parts, were the Ptolemies. And so they're going to be divided up in these four. So then Daniel goes in to focus on those two regions because those are the ones directly related to Israel. And that's the focal point. This is a prophecy about what's going to happen in the land of Israel. So the kings of the north and the south. And I'm going to say this, I am no historian. As a matter of fact, I barely passed history of Western civilization. My first time through, I think I got a D. So just to kind of tell you this, my history professor would probably be horrified that I'm even talking history with anybody. So in any case, I'm going to do my best through the research that I've done to kind of convey this information. But if I do pronounce something wrong or get a date wrong, do know that I'm doing my best I can here. So Daniel chapter 11, verse 5, it says, "Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he and shall rule. And his authority shall be a great authority. And after some years I shall make an alliance. And the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement." Okay, remember, we're talking about the Seleucids in the north, Ptolemies in the south. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch from her roots shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the kingdom of the north, and shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt, so again, that's the kingdom of the south, with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His son shall wage war and assemble a great multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through. And again he shall carry the war as far as his fortresses. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall then raise a multitude greater than the first. And after some years he shall come on with great army and abundant supplies. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violence among your own people shall lift them in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. That's a key verse there, because there's going to be turmoil in the land of Israel. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city. And the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But when he comes against him, he shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land. That's an important phrase there to take note of. With destruction in his hands. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and shall bring terms into agreement and perform them. He shall give them to the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Afterward he would turn his face towards the coastlines, and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back on him. Then he shall return back towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But a few days he will be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. So, a lot of history here. Now, this is history. To us, this is history. To Daniel, this was prophecy. Okay, so just remember how that works. Okay, so the first, I'm going to put up a map here in a second to help you. The king of the south is Ptolemy the First. We know this from history. After Alexander's death, he was in control of the Egyptian areas. And just if you can remember those two things, Ptolemy south and Seleucids north, that's really going to help you when we talk about this. And here's a map to kind of give you an idea of the areas that we're talking about. And again, it's all related to this strip of land right here. That's where all the conflict is. There's another commander that's over here. We're not worried about him. There's another commander that's up there. We're not worried about him. We're really worried about the Seleucids, which are here in the orange, also called Antigonus, because they're going to be called Antioch. There are going to be some of them that are going to have that name. And then with the Ptolemies are going to be in the south. Okay, so that kind of gives you. So if you know modern day Egypt, and then you have Saudi Arabia with the Saudi Arabian Gaza. You have the Israel there, Syria, Jordan, places like that. Okay, just kind of give you a roadmap to where we're talking about here. The king of the north is Seleucus the first. He was in control of the northern Israel, modern day Syria, Palestine, those types of things. Ptolemy the first seized control of Palestine from Seleucid the first. But Seleucid never gave up authority over Palestine. That's where the conflict is. Okay, the Ptolemies wanted it, and the Seleucids wanted it. And that was the place of conflict. It sounds much like today. Things really have not changed all that much. And that's really the point of what we're talking about, is that we think, oh man, this conflict, this is so new. No, this has been going on for thousands of years. Okay, what happens is in Daniel chapter 11, verse 6, it says that the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he and shall rule, and authority shall be great. And after some years I'll make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north. So there's a dynastic marriage. So they're saying, okay, so how do we get peace? Well, in the ancient times, how do you get peace? Well, we're going to marry somebody off, okay? Because that's going to be kind of like an exchange. So you're going to take my daughter, and she's going to be your wife, and that'll kind of seal this treaty that we're not going to be attacking. So Ptolemy II gave his daughter Bernice to be married to Antiochus II. Antiochus is in the north. Antiochus had divorced his wife to marry Bernice. Eventually, Antiochus II went back to his first wife, and his first wife had Antiochus, Bernice, and their son all poisoned and killed. And this is all referenced right here in these verses. History, actually in verse 6. And so the end of that alliance, if you will, was the ending of that marriage between these two dynasties. So, of course, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids go back to war. And Ptolemy III went to war against Seleucid II. And this is referenced in verses 7 through 9. Daniel chapter 11, verses 7 through 9. Ptolemy III, we know from history, had very successful military campaigns. He took spoils back from war to Egypt, and he was very successful in what he did. But his success was short-lived because Seleucid II then attacks the south and recovers the land that the Ptolemy had taken, although he did not take the original kingdom of Egypt. Okay, so Seleucid III then wages war against the Ptolemies and is successful. So now the kingdom of the north is more powerful and waging war against the south. But he has a very short reign. As a matter of fact, history tells us he only reigned for about 5 years. So in verse 10, it says that his son shall wage war and shall assemble great forces, which shall keep coming and overflowing past and move again as far as the fortresses. Then the king of the south moves. So Antiochus III, which was known as Antiochus the Great, had a long reign. And he was the one who took back control of Palestine from the Ptolemies. So now control is back with the Seleucids. And this, I'm going to kind of read some things that I have here because it'll kind of help understand all the things that are happening in Daniel chapter 11, verses 11 through 13. It says that the south at this time was ruled by Ptolemy IV, but he was an effective leader, and he would lose to Antiochus III. And why they just kept putting numbers after their names makes it very difficult, I know. And so this description of Antiochus really takes us through verse 19. Verse 11 actually refers to a battle we know from history called the Battle of Raphia in 217 BC. But Ptolemy IV had won the battle because he had advantage of numbers, as the Bible says. But the victory was short-lived because he didn't press the advantage. When he had the Ptolemies on the run, he just kind of stopped and went back to his strongholds, back to his capital, which was in Antioch. And so the Ptolemies started going through the turmoil. They're losing strength, and so they're suffering from some domestic problems. If you remember, these are all Greeks They don't actually belong in the area in which they are. So the native population of the Egyptians wants to regain control over their own land, right? I mean, it makes sense. And so so they have an internal problem there with the native Egyptians wanting to take over control from the occupying Greeks. Because remember, and we'll get to this in a second, and you'll know this name, you'll know the name Cleopatra. These are all Greek people that are ruling over non-native lands. We don't think of it that way because it's hundreds of years, but at the same time, that's what's going on here. And so this internal instability is happening. Antiochus III recovers all the land that's lost, but then his son, Ptolemy IV, and his wife, they die suddenly. We don't really know why. He was only 35 at the time of his death, and his son, Ptolemy V, is only 6 years old. So the idea of him being influential in the kingdom is not really going to happen all that much. So Antiochus III says, well, this is the time to press the advantage, right? The king that was in authority, he's died. There's only a kid that's at rule right now. So he says he's going to press the advantage, but those battles didn't go well because the general named as Scopas beat him back. And in the battle that happened at 200 BC near Caesarea Philippi, Antiochus did win, and Syria and Palestine became under rule from the Seleucids once again. But this is about the Jewish people. And all of this is turmoil. Verse 14 speaks to all the turmoil that's happening in the land of Judea, where the Jews were living. We're not actually sure all of what it's referring to, but we know there were different factions, some of them supporting the Ptolemies, some of them supporting the Seleucids. And then that played all kinds of political factors in the Jewish people at this time, which leads to an uprising. Antiochus III, in verse 15 through 16, presses his advantage and establishes the Seleucids in the beautiful land. That's a reference there to Israel. But Antiochus says, you know what I can do? I can give my daughter, wait, there we go. Antiochus III ends up giving his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy V in a treaty marriage, okay? So that's how Cleopatra comes to Egypt. And you've probably heard of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, and that's a more famous part of history. The thinking from Antiochus III was that Cleopatra would be some sort of spy, that she would go down to Egypt and she would kind of report on the activities of the Ptolemies. But that didn't happen. Cleopatra actually became more loyal to the Ptolemies and eventually wanted to overthrow the Seleucids in alliance with Mark Antony, if you remember from history. And so the Egyptian kingdom then became more of a ruling influence after Ptolemy V's death. Her son Ptolemy VI would succeed her 8 years later. Antiochus III then continued his ambitions, would be put into a new power comes onto play, and that is the Romans. And that's going to be found in Daniel chapter 11, verses 18 and 19. Antiochus III, he says there's a lot of ambition here, and he thinks he can push into what is now coming the Roman Empire, which is going to be towards Turkey in that area. And so he starts pushing that way, but it didn't work. He was actually warned that the Roman Empire was very powerful, but he wouldn't listen. And so the Romans sent the general Lucius and Cornelius Scipio, if you remember Scipio from history, to defeat Antiochus III at the Battle of, does anybody know history? This is a famous battle. The Battle of Thermopylae. Now Jeopardy's, I know it's right there. Jeopardy is, everybody's going, I'm going on Jeopardy. But anyway, he defeats him at Thermopylae and then again at Magnesia in 190 BC. And so then Antiochus III retreats back to his capital where he would be contained to his death. His son, Seleucus IV, raised taxes. How do we keep the empire of the Romans in check? Well, how does any empire stay in power? I got to raise the taxes, right? So he starts raising the taxes. He's got to keep the Romans in check. They're coming on the border, and it's kind of like they're the burgeoning empire. And so Seleucus, then, he starts raising the taxes, but then something happens to him. History's not really sure what happens, but he dies in suspicious circumstances, just as his brother, who was taken hostage to Rome, is returning back to the land of Syria. Some think that this his brother, who would be Antiochus the Fourth, also known as Antiochus Epiphanes. That's a more probably a familiar name to you if you're in the New Testament. He's the one who comes back into power after Seleucus the Sixth, or excuse me, Seleucus the Fourth dies under suspicious circumstances. So, all that to say, that's prophecy for them about everything that's going to happen to their land. That's what Daniel's doing. That's the vision. This is what's going to take place in the land of Israel over the next several hundred years. Okay? But why is this important? Well, because of Antiochus the Fourth, Antiochus Epiphanes. Because Antiochus Epiphanes becomes a typing for the Antichrist. And so that's where we're going to go with this. So this climatic king of the north, Antiochus the Fourth. And again, this gets into a lot of different things that we'll talk about. Climatic king of the north, Antiochus the Fourth. And we have to remember, too, when we start talking about Antiochus the Fourth, Antiochus Epiphanes. When we go into the New Testament, he was known for the abominations, right? He was the abomination of desolation, all that. So we have to remember that Daniel is looking at him, and he's not necessarily connecting him with the Antichrist. We do that today because we understand some different things than they would have had back then. But let's start reading. Daniel chapter 11, verse 21. In his place shall rise a contemptible person, to whom royal majesty had not been given. Okay, so he wasn't supposed to be king because he had been taken captive. And so he wasn't supposed to be on the throne. He shall come in without warning and shall obtain a kingdom by flattery. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise a plan against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power in his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great army, but he shall not stand, for the plot shall be devised against him. So there's going to be a defeat of the Ptolemies. Even those who eat his own food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. He shall return to his land. This is the king of the north. This is the Antiochus Epiphanes. He shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. But at the appointed time he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be as the time before. So there's going to be something else that happens. He thinks he can go back down and get more plunder, but he can't. For ships from Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged against, and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear, and profane the temple and fortresses, and shall take away the regular burnt offerings, and shall shut up the abomination that makes them desolate. So that's where we get that term from. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action, which that happens. We'll talk about that in history. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, for though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder, when they stumble they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that it may be refined, purified, and made white, until the end of the time, for it still waits for the appointed time. So Antiochus IV, he arrives in Syria. Remember, he was taken captive during one of the battles against the Romans. The Romans had taken him off to Rome. He was there incarcerated for a while. But eventually he's released, and when he's released, his brother mysteriously dies, and he assumes the throne. When he came to the throne, he was helped by a pro-Syrian, by a pro-Seleucid political and religious leader who was the high priest at the time, and his name was Jason. And Jason manipulated the priesthood and brought a lot of displeasure to the Jewish people. So then Antiochus in verse 25, he turns his attention to the Ptolemies in the south, and he goes to war against them. but he finds success the first time, but not the second time. And after not finding success the second time, he returns back to his home in the north and starts acting aggressively towards the Jewish people. There are some historical issues with what takes place here. We don't have a lot of information. The apocryphal book of the Maccabees, if you want to read the Maccabees, this is the time frame of the Maccabees and when they wrote about the rebellions and things like that. Some of what's in the Maccabees is helpful for history. Some of it's not, because it was written in such a way that it kind of clouds some things. What we do know is this. We do know that Antiochus became very aggressive against the Jewish people. We do know that he looted the temple. He needed money. Where's their gold and treasure, all this stuff? Well, that's why he did what his fathers and his fathers' fathers would never have done. They never went into the temple. They never took anything from it. Antiochus does. He actually went so far as to erect a fortress near the temple, because he wanted to keep an eye on the Jewish people and what they were doing behind closed doors, so to speak, when they go to worship. He put a stop to the daily sacrifices. They weren't allowed to sacrifice. He actually put idolatrous images within the temple. And that's what we called the abomination of desolation, was he offered sacrifices to these idols. The object, most likely, they think that it was a meteorite. And this kind of gets into some of the Dome of the Rock stuff. But in any case, they think that it was a meteorite that was put on the Temple Mount, representing Zeus. And then pigs were offered and sacrificed to it. And there is some connection, I do believe, between the meteorite that the Islam worships. It's not a very popular thing, but they do. If you want to look that up, it's part of their worship. But I believe it's connected to this event right here. I really do. Jason was removed from the priesthood at that time. Melenius, who wasn't even in the priestly family, he becomes priest. Eventually, Jason does move against Antiochus IV, but he's distracted and it doesn't actually happen. So when Antiochus returns back from his campaign towards the south, he comes back to Jerusalem and slaughters the Jewish people. Just thousands and thousands of Jewish people are put to death that time because of the rebellion that the Maccabees had started. The holiday that they still celebrate today is, does anybody know? Hanukkah. Yeah, exactly. A festival of lights, and it comes from this time frame when they sell. It's the oil for the lamp, and the miracle that the oil didn't run out, that the lamp kept going for those 7 days to keep the flame at the temple alive. And so that's what they're. But it goes right back to this time frame. Hanukkah is a celebration. The faithful remnant is preserved. And so we come back to the last part of chapter 11, because the question is, who are we talking about? When we get to the last part of chapter 11, it seems to shift a little bit, and it seems to connect things that really haven't happened yet. And so we're gonna talk about that a little bit here, because in the last part of Daniel chapter 11, there's what we're going to call the king who does whatever he wants. And it seems as if this is where it hasn't happened yet. And we'll get to why in just a second. Remember, when we're studying prophecy, this is very important to remember. When we're studying prophecy, and I've used this illustration a bunch with you, but it's like the mountain ranges. And so sometimes in the vision, everything looks like it's coming close together, but there's gaps between the actual events. And I think that's what's happening here. I think in history, Daniel's looking out and he sees Antiochus Epiphanes, and he sees everything that's happening in the land of Israel and all the bad things that are going through the Jewish people. And then the next event that he sees is another time that looks very similar to the first time, but it's not the first time. It may be a different time. So let's read this and see what's going on. And like I said, we're going to term this guy the king who does whatever he wants, because the verse 36 says, "And the king shall do as he wills." And then look at the description. "He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god." Well, in history, Antiochus didn't do that. Now, did he think of himself as probably a deity? Well, all the kings pretty much did at that point in time. But the idea of speaking against astonishing things against the God of gods. "He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. What's the God of fortresses? God of war. It says war. He's gonna worship war, power. A God with whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign God. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many and shall divide the land for a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. But the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. He shall come into countries and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall. But these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab, and the main part of the Amorites. He shall stretch his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. He shall pitch his tents, palatial tents, against the sea and glorious holy mountains. He shall come to his end with none to help him. So, I'm taking the interpretive principle this is not Antiochus IV. I do believe this is a different thing. I think the language here becomes very hyperbolic, exaggerated. In verse 40, it talks about the time of the end, and we know that at Antiochus, after he was off the scene, that wasn't the end of history. More things have happened. And so we do know the reign of Antiochus was terrible, but it doesn't fit, I don't think, the description that's here. And so I think what we're talking about here, starting in verse 35, is the figure we would know as the Antichrist. And that's what I think. But again, it could be referring to something completely different because it's just not very clear. What we do know is whoever this figure is, his pride is going to be enormous. No one's going to be able to tell him what to do. He doesn't listen to anybody. He just does whatever he wants. His pride's going to be enormous, and he's going to be successful. It's kind of a little scary to think about, but he's going to have a lot of success. Things are going to go his way, at least initially. Things start to fall apart after a while, but for the start of it, it looks pretty good. He will show regard for no one but himself. He doesn't care about the regional gods or anybody else and what they think. He's really just about himself. Also, he's going to use a military machine to oppress. He'll pay extreme attention to the military. He's going to use that to oppress. Those who are loyal are going to be rewarded with prosperity. If you're loyal, if you stand with him, then there's a lot of rewards for you. If you don't, things aren't going to go well for you. He will come in control of everything, even Israel. But some Arab nations are not going to come under his influence. That's when it talks about Edom and Moab. There's going to be some places that don't follow what he's wanting. But pretty much every other Middle Eastern country is going to come under his control. He's going to annihilate those in the east and the north. East would be where, in this vernacular, it'd probably be where the Palestinians currently, were, that area. The north is going to be Lebanon, Syria, those type of areas there where the Seleucids were. Those places are going to be annihilated. He will make his home in Israel, Jerusalem most likely, but he will be ended. The point of this, I believe, is there's a violent end to history. We'd like to think that everybody, settles down and we all kind of, sing anti-war songs and all of that, but that's not the way the Bible portrays the end. The Bible portrays the end as a violent end to history, and I think that's the point of verse 45. But here's the flip side: there is salvation. There is salvation. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people. And we've talked about that before, angels and their authority and how they influence that. And there should be a time of trouble, such as never been since there was a nation till that time. Now that's crazy. You think about all the things that have happened in that land, in that area, and all of that. There should be a time of trouble, such never has been since there was a nation till that time. That was one of the reasons why when Israel was reformed, they was like, hey, that's a big deal because it's a nation again. Okay, so this is part of that. But at that time your people shall be delivered, every one whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightest of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And I've always found that to be a very interesting phrase. So Michael's going to rise up. Michael is the patron angel of Israel. He's going to rise up and protect the people of Israel and fight for God's people, And I think that also is a reminder this is a supernatural fight. This is not just a physical military fight, but there's a supernatural thing going on here. The end will be a time of great distress. Nothing else in history will compare to what takes place at the end of days. And it's going to happen fast. Someone once said that things, when they get to the end, they go slowly and then all at once. That's how the end is going to be. It's going to be slowly, then all at once. Quickly, there will be an end to the distress. And there's really no announcement of deliverance. The dead will be raised. This is actually one of the clearest and first references to a resurrection. And that's one, this is one of the reasons why the Pharisees and the Sadducees disagreed. It's because of this verse right here. Because of the idea of a resurrection. The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did, and so those were two sects. And that's one of the reasons why I believe this was prophecy, because they would have had access to this information, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So this is a clearest reference to the idea of a resurrection, because in the rest of the Old Testament, the idea of an afterlife is largely unclear. It really doesn't talk very much about it. But some people here are raised to eternal life, others to contempt. The righteous are going to be glorified. And again, this is all fleshed out more in the New Testament. So Daniel is seeing things that are going to happen, the idea of glorification. But then he's told to seal it up. Keep it a secret until the end of time. The idea of sealing a document is the idea it's not going to be clear. We're going to have a lot of guessing to do until the end of time. I think the concept, and I interpret it this way, you're welcome to disagree, but that last statement, many will roam about and the knowledge will increase. I don't view that as a positive statement, that this is what's going to be taking place. I'm viewing it as very much a negative statement, almost like a warning that many people are going to be just roaming about. And when we think about roaming about, it's like can't find their way. It's like I can't get my bearings. I don't know what's coming next. I'm confused. Knowledge is increasing. We have access to more information than we ever had, but I still can't figure it out. And so there's roaming about. They're looking for something to give them purpose in life. And yet they have so much knowledge. And so I just think about where we are. It's like zombies just walking around in the darkness, just groping for anything, and they can't find anything, even though they have access to more than anybody else has in history. And yet they still just can't find their way. And then there's the final words here in verses 5 through 13. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on the bank of the stream, one on the bank, and one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Normal question, you want to know? And I heard the man in the linen cloth, who was above the waters of the stream, he raised his right hand and his left hand towards heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it would be for, and here's the phrase that everybody wants to focus on, right? Time, times, and half a time. And when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will be finished. I heard these things but did not understand. And I said, My Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. And here's the next phrases that everybody wants to focus on. And from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up. Okay, so what was that? The time where the regular burnt offerings is taken away, that's when Antiochus stopped and then the abomination that is desolate is set up. He says it's going to be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at 1,335 days. But go your way, and you shall find rest, and shall stand your allotted place at the end of the days. So, how long will it be till the end? That's the question, right? How ends it all going to happen? How's it all going to go? And that's a natural question. If you're in a time of difficulty and distress, to have hope, you want to know how long is this going to go on. Matter of fact, before you go into surgery, what does the doctors tell you? This surgery is going to last 5 hours. Okay, well, 5 hours, that's how long my family has to deal with the stress, the anxieties, and all those sort of things. So that's a natural thing to ask. How long is this going to end? How long is the suffering going to last? And that's what, how long his day was. Yes, that's part of the problem. So the answer that he's given is this: time, times, and half a time. And if you read most, I want to be charitable. Most more modern commentators, they'll say that's 3.5 years, right? And that's what they will all say. If you just read them out there, and that's the very common thing. But it's not the way I take that to mean. I don't think it's talking about 3.5 years. What I think is this here: time. It's a period, right? We don't know exactly how long that is, but it's a time. And then there's times, which means that it feels like it's gaining momentum. It feels like it's going to go on for a while. But then there's half a time. And so it's like things are starting off, they start to gain acceleration, but then they're suddenly just cut off. Just when you think you have more time, you don't have any time. So the end is going to come in a way that is unexpected. When things are going in a direction. So I don't look at this and say this is a specific, because what they try to do is they try to take the words and say, well, time is 1 year, and then there's 2 years, and so that makes 3 years, and there's half a year, and so that's where they get that from. But I don't find that in the interpretation, with all due respect to the people who hold to that. But Daniel wants more information. He wants to know more. Of course, that's natural. But his request is denied. The revelation is over. No information is going to be given until it's time. And now is not the time. And so his request is denied. But he is given a little bit of a hint. The wicked will continue to be wicked, and some will be made righteous. Okay, so it's kind of a little. What it is God's always going to keep people around that are following Him and doing His ways. And then there's 2 more periods that are delineated. And that's the 1,290 days and the 1,335 days. The meaning of these 2 numbers is, it's one of those things like, who knows? And that's all I can really tell you with any certainty is who knows. Commentators really like to try and talk a lot about them, but it's just not clear. It could be a reference to the coming of Antiochus IV and the desecration of the temple. It could be a future desecration. Like I told you before, I don't even view it that there has to be a physical temple to have desecration. I think desecration can come through the temple, which is you. Our body's a temple. So I think that it's hard for me to believe the things that would have to happen in order to get a temple rebuilt in Jerusalem on the mountain where they want to put it almost seems impossible. That doesn't mean a miracle can't happen. Doesn't mean it can't happen. I'm not going to say that. But I don't even think it's necessary in order for these prophecies to come true. Jesus seemed to indicate when he gives his teachings that these things have not yet taken place when he talks about the end. That's why I don't really put them with Antiochus. I put them in the future. But some people put them back. Some people put forward. I can't be clear about that. But Daniel has promised rest and reward. And again, I think that's the very important part because even though you want to make sense of all these things, and some of them are very confusing, and you probably won't remember much of anything I said tonight, one thing to remember is that despite of present circumstances, despite present appearances, God is in control. And that's the main point of Daniel. And it ends with that same thing. Daniel, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. God is in control. And one of the things that I always bring to the conversation when we talk about prophecy is we get a lot of worry and anxiety on getting it right. And I'm like, don't, because God is in control. Despite of what it looks like, God's in control. It might look like it's going off the rails, and you know what? It probably is. But God's still in control. And so Daniel's promised rest and reward. And so are we as we remember that God is in sovereign control over all things. And so I conclude this with saying what I told my ordination board, which they did not like to hear, but it's what I told them. They said, what do you believe about the end times? And what stances do you take on all these things? And I said, you know what my statement is? God in his own time and his own way will bring about the end of all things. And they looked at me and they said, yeah, but we want specifics. We want to know all these things. I said, yeah, but God in his own time and his own way will bring about the end of all things. It really doesn't matter what I think about them. What matters is God's in control, and he'll make it happen in his time. So, any questions or thoughts or anything like that? Yeah, Ben. Yeah, no. Yeah. Right. Yes, goes right back to that same thing. Okay. Yeah, we're on the welcome. That's right. We're on the welcoming committee. That's right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, it's part of it. It's a misinterpretation, unfortunately. That's one of the places that they point to and say that because they say you're great prince. He's the one who comes to save you. But it's just a misinterpretation of the role there. Well, that's a great question because actually the Sadducees didn't accept chapter 12. They thought chapter 12 was added afterwards, and they didn't want it. They just simply did not acknowledge its existence. Matter of fact, if you go into even into some of Luther's writings, chapter 12 is very squashed. Did not like it. I don't remember the Bibles that some Bibles will even put a note in there to say this may have been added later. Um, I don't think so. There's no reason for me to think that. But part of it's because of the shift in tone that you go from all of this war and calamity and then to salvation. But when you think about the way the Old Testament prophets wrote, that was the way they wrote. They wrote judgment, calamity, salvation's ultimately coming. Follow the Lord. Follow his ways, do what's right. So to me, it fits completely within the way every other Old Testament prophet wrote in that sense. Now, the content is different, obviously, because a lot of the Old Testament prophets wrote against specific judgments. This one's more of a general worldwide thing. But even when you think of this, it's not even worldwide. It's really contained still to the Middle East. It's really still focused on those. It's broader, but it's still focused, and it's very much in line with the way the rest of the prophets would have written. So, yeah. Anything else? Any other questions or thoughts? Did you enjoy the history lesson tonight? No. No. It is a part of the reason why I broke it down the way I did is because of the way that if you go into the internets and you go in there and you listen to commentators, they're going to tell you that the kings of the north and the south are different people, and they're going to look at them as future people. Whereas and you'll get this. Matter of fact, it was very popular to say the kings of the north was Russia, USSR, and that the kings of the south were the African nations, and that the African nations were going to rise, and we were going to support them, and the United States was going to come over and support the South, and that U.S. and that was very popular for a time because they misinterpreted this whole concept. There's also the idea of pushing east, and for some reason people would get that wrong and say that's China because they're oriented into a different way than what the biblical writers were, and so they'd say, "Oh, the kings of the east, that must mean China," and so that was another part of and so that's why I broke it down the way I did, was because there's a lot of writings out there that will take those two kings and forget that this is history and not still to come. So anyway, that's why I did that. But all right, any other questions or anything? Thoughts? All right, next week, God willing, we will begin some more theology talking about the church and the role of the church in the world, the role of the church, what the church does, the ordinances of the church, and just all the things that really make us who we are. And so we'll be exploring that for the next couple of weeks. And then after that, God willing, we will end the year with 1 John. We'll go through the book of 1 John together. So, okay. Next week? It'll be more of a topical. It won't be we won't be going through a book. It's what we call systematic theology, if you want the proper term. It's when we take all of the passages of scripture that are about this subject and put them together. Yeah. So it'll be first time about what is the church? What is the Bible? When we say the word church, what do we mean? Is it a place we go, or is it who we are? And so we'll be talking about that. Okay. All right, well, let's close in prayer, and then we'll take any prayer requests and things that you guys have. Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your blessings, and we thank you, Father, that we can look back at history and we can see how things came to